Today's daf is daf Samach Ches. And we had a principle on the top of the Omud, Mitoch Shelo Hutra Ella Al Yidei Kituf, Zocherhu, that even though we should be afraid of allowing someone to handle the Chadash because he might eat the Chadash, but nevertheless, if we tell him that the way he handles it is going to be in a shinui, in a very unusual way, like, for example, instead of harvesting with a sickle, he'll use kituf, then zocherhu, as he's implementing this reaping in a very unusual way, he'll certainly remind himself that this is chadash and he won't eat it. Amalei Abaye, but tenach ktsira. Okay, so reaping, you suggested a good answer, but what about after reaping? There's tchina, there's harkada, Michael Meimar, and holo kasha. And Abai is going to insist in a consistent way that even with regard to the other actions necessary to prepare the flour, for example, tchina, which is grinding, or hakada, which is sifting, he's going to do it b'shina. He's going to do it in an unusual way. Tchina b'reichayev yad. He'll use, instead of a regular mill, he'll use a hand mill, and hakada al yidei napa, he'll use the back of the al gav ha napa, on the back of the sieve. Now the Gemara raises another question. He says, Beis HaShalchin. Beis HaShalchin is an irrigated field. The Sharya Ktsira, where he's going to reap it in a regular manner. There's no shinui, even before they brought the Omer. Desnan, and I'll prove it to you from a Mishnah later on in Daf Ayin. The Mishnah is going to tell us that Kotzim Beis HaShalchin Sheba Amokim, that these irrigated fields can be reaped in the valleys in the usual manner. Avalo Gochim, we're not going to allow him to stack the harvesting grain because stacking the grains is already a very is a very all-encompassing kind of activity. And also, it's implemented by the workers in the field. So the Rabbanan prohibited this because they were afraid that they might eat from the forbidden grains. And with this kasha, the Gemara retreats from its original answer of Rab. Now we have to come up with a different answer. Chadash b'dilimine. Now, once something becomes a cheftu d'isur of chadash, it's asur until they bring the omer. And therefore, it's b'dilimine. He has a natural aversion, and he separates himself from chadash. And as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda's shita in bedika, where Rabbi Yehuda holds that you don't do bedika during Yom Tov because he might eat it, because chametz lo b'dilimine, it might be instinctual for a person to eat chametz without even thinking, because he always eats chametz the whole year round. So chametz is a cheftzeh de'tera the whole year round, and therefore we have a chashash that he might come to eat it. Omar Rava, to Rabbi Yehuda, kasha, the Rabbanon lo kasha. You found a contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda, who allows you to do whatever you have to do with the chadash, as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda, who prohibits any involvement with chametz during Pesach. And you didn't ask a question on the contradiction between two rulings of the Rabbanon, because with regard to Rabbanon, they say you're allowed to do and obligated to do B'dika during Yom Tov. We're not afraid that while you're doing the B'dika, because it's low B'dilim and you're used to eating chametz all year round, you come to eat the chametz. But yet, with regard to Chadash, they were more machmir and they prohibited it. And they said, don't get involved at all in any activities that involve preparing chadash for the shuk, for the marketplace, because you might come to eat it. We already gave a very good answer to resolve the contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda. Right? And we said that with regard to chametz, it's low b'dilimine, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda is more machmir, and chametz, we're afraid you'll eat it. However, in the case of Chadash, it's also the whole year round until he brings the Omer, and therefore B'dilimine, we don't have a Chashash. And now, Drabanan lo kasha, I'm going to reconcile the two opinions of the Rabbanan. And that is, why do the Rabbanan allow you and obligate you to do a bedika during the Moed, if you didn't do a bedika before the Moed, and they're not afraid that you might come to eat the chametz? Hu atzmo mechazol of lasorfo mechel al. Oh, we're going to think that the man is looking for the chametz in order to destroy it and he's going to eat it? The very fact that he's looking for the chametz in order to destroy it will send him the message that this is chametz and you're not allowed to eat it. That's why he's destroying it. But in the case of chadash, he's not looking for the chadash, in order to destroy it. Now Rav Ashi comes up with an alternative reconciliation of the two statements of Rabbi Yehuda, and he says Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha. By the way, what we're going to learn here in this last piece before the Mishnah is bedusa. Bedusa means it's a mistake. Now, exactly why the Gemara had to introduce that which was a mistake, we can think about that. But anyway, here's the mistake. Rabbi Ashi Omar Kemach Koli Tanan. Now, according to this answer of Rav Ashi, when Rabbi Yehuda said that he doesn't want you to be involved in Bedikas Chametz during Yontif, and yet he was more lenient with regard to involvement with Chadash, it's because the Mishnah told us that there's Kemach Koli. Kemach Koli means that he takes toasted kernels and he makes a flour out of them. Now, it seems that kemach, flour, even toasted flour, toasted kernels that make flour, is not edible. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says there's no chashash that a person can't eat something that's not edible. So the Gemara says, Hadar Rav Ashi B'dusi, this is a mistake, because Tenach mi koli v'elech. It's true that if you're involved in handling the grains after they were oven dried and they were toasted, it's no longer fit to eat. Although, by the way, people do eat that stuff today. Anyway, but what happens afterwards? Okay, after it's oven dried, it's toasted, then what they do is they, I'm sorry, what do they do before they toast it? Is they start with the harvesting of the grains. At that point, the grain is still soft and edible. And therefore, why doesn't Rabbi Yehuda prohibit that? Ad koli mai ikol meimar. What about all this stuff that goes on with handling the grain before they get to the point where it becomes unedible when they toast it? You want to give Rabbi's old answer that we're only going to allow reaping if he does it in an unusual way through plucking it off the ground. Is Beis HaShalchin the Shaya Ktsira, Ma'ikol Meimar. We already raised the issue about Beis HaShalchin, which is an irrigated field, and the Brisa went out of its way to say you're allowed to reap it in the regular way, the usual manner, and it's edible. So why shouldn't we say that we're choshesh that he might eat it? Ela hod Rav Ashi b'dusi, we have to reject Rav Ashi. I find it very interesting because if I'm not mistaken about the history of Ina Rav Ashi were the last two Amoraim that organized the Talmud. So it's kind of strange to me that Rav Ashi would integrate into his very Talmud a bedusa, something which is a mistake. In any event, we now begin the Mishnah, Madaf Samaches. Now, what we're talking about now is when exactly are you allowed to eat the chadash? Meaning the omer is matir the chadash. Well, today after the korban habayis, we don't have the korban omer, and now we're going to introduce another element, and that is the date itself, meaning the 16th of Nisan, is matir chadash. Then we're going to have to ask ourselves, when you say the date itself, do you mean daybreak in the morning, or do you mean the afternoon, or do you mean the evening? So Mishakarev HaOmer, if the Beis HaMikdash stands, then Hutar Chodesh Miyad, immediately when they bring the Omer, then all the Chodesh becomes Yashan, and it's all Mutter. And this is the one point in this whole complicated sugya that nobody argues about. This is the one point that's universally accepted, that when the Mikdash stands, then the Omer is matir chadash, and you can eat the chadash after the Omer is brought, because then it becomes Yoshan. Now, if you're located close to Yerushalayim, then you'll know exactly when they brought the Omer. I mean, the word will spread very quickly from person to person. But harachokim, what about people who are far, far away from Yerushalayim? They're up in, in Metula or in Haifa or in Kiryat Shmona, where they are, and they don't know exactly when the Korban Omer was brought or wasn't brought. When can they start eating the chadash? Is michatzos hayom ulahalon. In other words, the Omer is brought with daybreak of the 16th of Nisan, and we can rely on the bezdin that supervises the avodas hakarbanos, that they'll make sure that by the time we get to noon, the Korban Omer is certainly brought. Okay, all this is during the time of the Mikdash. Mishachar Beis HaMikdash, Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. That word Hiskin is going to occupy our minds here in the Daf Yomi, what exactly it means. But we'll start with the simple pshat, as the Gemara assumed at the beginning of the sugya, that Hiskin means it was established Hakana. What did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai establish after the Churban Abayis? Shehei Yom Hanaf Kulo Os. Now, the phrase Yom Hanaf is referring to the 16th of Nisan, the day in which they bring the Omer and they do the Tnufa and so forth and so on. And now we're going to say that the entire 16th of Nisan, after the Churban Abayis, is Osur Bechadosh. We have to wait until the night going into the 17th of Nisan. And the big question is why? Why does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai do it that way? We can go with one of two approaches. We can either think that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds that even when the Mikdash stood, if we didn't know exactly when the Omer is brought, we have to wait until the day passes. So that's what we're going to do when there's no Mikdash and there's no Omer. Alternatively, it could be that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai holds, and this has to do with a pasuk called Itzumo Shel Yom, that the heter of Chadash is not dependent upon the bringing of the Omer, but rather on the day itself, and the day doesn't end until the nighttime. In any event, Rabbi Yehuda here in the Mishnah, who lived generations after Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, was upset because he said, Halo min Torah hu osir ad etzem hayom hazeh. Why are you introducing a takana as if to say that you have to establish something? And really, this is a doraisa halacha. Meaning, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai held that if not for the Takonis Chachamim, in the absence of the Beis Hamikdash, then daybreak, which is the time that's ro'ui, that's suitable for the bringing of the Omer, that itself is enough to be matir. And the Rabbanan, meaning Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, made a takana. No, let's wait till the end of the day, which we have to see why, but he made that takana. So Rabbi Yehuda holds no, that the pasuk says, "V'lechem v'koli v'karba lo sochlu ad etzem hayom hazeh aviachem es korban elokechem." And what does it mean ad etzem hayom hazeh? On the one hand, it says in the pasuk, "Ad haviachem es korban elokechem," which means that it all depends upon when the korban is brought, and that korban, the Omer, when it's brought, is matir the chodesh. But on the other hand, it says ad etzem hayom hazeh, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that etzem means the entire day, and it means ad halayla. So ad etzem means ad viad bechlal. Now, does Rabbi Yehuda deny that the Omer when the Mikdash stood is Matir Chadash? I don't think so. I think he's splitting the pasuk into half. The first half of the pasuk. Well, let's go backwards. The second half of the pasuk, Ad Aviechem es Omer Atnufa, that's when the Mikdash stood. The first half of the pasuk, Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh, which Rabbi Yehuda interprets till the nighttime, when the day passes, that's referring to Bisman She'ein Beis HaMikdash Kayim. So therefore, the Doraisa Halacha is that the matir of Chadash during the Mikdash time was the Omer, but after the Mikdash is gone, it's the day itself, and the day only ends with nighttime. You need the entire day to be matir Chadash. If that's a Doraisa Halacha that applies from the Pasuk Etzem Hayom Hazeh, if there's no Mikdash, then why was it necessary for Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai to make a takana that we can't eat chadash until the nighttime when that's a doraisa halacha? That's Rabbi Yehuda's objection to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. How do the Rechokim know that the carbon was brought by midday? They know she'ein bezdin misatzlimbo, that Bezdin is going to supervise the avodas hakarbanos, in this case the avos ha-omer, and they're going to make sure that by midday the omer was certainly brought. Gemara quotes Rav Shmuel, and then later Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. So first we start with Rav Shmuel. The Amishavai, they hold Bisman shebeis hamikdash kayam omer matir. Bisman she'ein beis hamikdash kayam. So again, the fact that the omer is matir when the mikdash is standing, that's muvan meila. That's understandable. What happens when there's no beis hamikdash after the mikdash is destroyed? Is heir mizrach matir. So they don't accept the principle that we mentioned before of Rabbi Yehuda that Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh means till the day passes, but rather they hold with daybreak, and it's roy for the Omer to be brought. Now the day itself is Matir Chodesh. And this is Doraisa Halacha, meaning there are two halachas Doraisa as to what's Matir Chodesh. It's either the Omer when the Mikdash stood, or it's the Zman HaRoy LaOmer when there is no Mikdash. And that's how they interpret Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh. My timer, Trei Kroi Ksivi. On the one hand, it says Ad Aviechem es Omer Tnufa, which means you have to wait for the Omer's brought. On the other hand, Ksiv Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh, meaning as soon as daybreak takes place, the beginning of the day, how could I reconcile that? So again, just to reiterate, according to Rav and Shmuel, there are two matirim that operate in two different periods of time for the Chadash. Either matter is the Havasa Omer, or the matter is the day itself, when it's royal Havasa Omer, which means daybreak. Ad Kan, Rav and Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish Amrit Shavai, they have a different sheet. Afilu Bisman Shebeis Hamikdash Kayim Heir Mizrach Matir. Unbelievable. They're not nispoil from the pasuk Ad Aviechem es Omer Tnufa, and for the first time we're encountering a shita that you don't even have to wait for the Omer. The matir is the day itself. The Zman HaRoy LaHavas HaOmer is matir even Bisman Beis HaMikdash Kayim when there is an Omer. Frek the Gemara v'Haksiv Ad Aviechem. And now we're going to get to the Gemara's answer to defend Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, which is going to be an answer that repeats itself at least 3 or 4 times, and that's the mitzvah. Meaning, there are two parts to the Isur Chodosh. There's the lav, that you're not allowed to eat Chodosh, and then there's the asay, that the Torah commands us. So again, the lav is v'lechem v'koli v'karmel lo sochlu, and then there's a mitzvah asay to wait until they bring the Omer before you eat the Chodosh. Let's just see if I could quote the pasuk here. Yeah. Ad Haviachem es Omer Tnufa as Karban Olekechem, etc., etc. That's a mitzvah say that you'd be mavatal the mitzvah say if you ate from the chodesh before they brought the omer. That's in a mitzvah say. So therefore, whenever it says in the pasuk ad haviachem, that's only referring to the mitzvah say. But as far as the losas is concerned, and any onish that you would get for violating the lotas, once it's Heira Mizrach, and the day emerges and it's Roy Lavas Homer, that's enough to remove the lotas of Lechem Koli V'Karmel Lo Sochlu. But as far as the essay, let me add a few words here. It says V'Lechem V'Koli V'Karmel Lo Sochlu Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh. So the Etzem Hayom Hazeh means when the day emerges, Yom V'Lo but Yom meaning when it's Roy Lakrova, and that's with Heira Mizrach. But then the next part of the pasuk says Ad Aviachem, that's already begetter a mitzvah say, and that's called a mitzvah. So if one were to eat after Heira Mizrach from the Chodesh, but after Heira Mizrach, but before the Omer was brought, he would be in violation of an essay of Ad Haviachem, but he would not be in violation of the lav of Lechem Koli V'Karmel Lo Sochlu Ad Etzem Hayom Hazeh. Now, this answer of Le Mitzvah is going to, as I mentioned earlier, is going to repeat itself time after time. Why? Because now the Gemara is going to ask from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, Mishakarav ha'omer hutar chodesh miyad. Right? Let's go back to our Mishnah and read it. Mishakarav ha'omer, that's it. I didn't make it up. So it means you have to wait till Akravas ha'omer to be matir chodesh. And the answer is Le Mitzvah. You want to be matir even the mitzvah ad aviachem, you need to wait until the omer is actually brought. Another kasha from the next Mishnah, it says, Ha'omer ha'yamatir b'mdinu shtei alechem b'migdash, and clearly we're referring to the Zman Shebeis HaMikdash Kayom, and yet the Mishnah states that you have to wait until the Omer, and that is when the Yermatir, the Chodosh, in Medina means for personal consumption, and once again, live mitzvah.